Welcome to the Scottish Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host Chris, and here we'll be delving into the multitude of strange occurrences that happen within Scotland. You can contact us with your accounts at the Scottish Paranormal Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Podbean, and contact us by either means. Tonight we've got Malcolm Robinson with us, paranormal investigator and researcher for over 40 years, formed SPI in 1979, author of many paranormal books within the area, been in numerous TV programmes throughout the UK and also across the world, and been in many conferences, and he's probably one of the only Scottish speakers to speak at American conferences as well on the topic. So welcome, Malcolm Robinson. How's it going?
Yes, it's going very well, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you on your show tonight. Yeah, great to be here.
Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start by being a wee bit boring here and probably asking you one of the questions that you probably get asked all the time when people are going to meet you. Basically, what got your original interest in the paranormal?
Well, I guess it stems way back as a young child growing up in Tullabuddy and Alawan, central Scotland. I had this deep-held fascination for all things weird and wonderful. But I guess that kind of stemmed from my parents taking me to the likes of Blackpool and Skegness and Scarborough, where as soon as we went to those holiday resorts, I immediately headed for the ghost train, you know, and just the captivation of this ghost train going through these dark tunnels with kind of cobwebs falling on your face was for me, you know, quite magical in a strange sort of way. And as I grew older, I started to read the books by Charles Fort, Eric Van Daniken, Jenny Randalls. I was intrigued by the TV shows like The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. And of course, the movies of the day the Earth Stood Still, The War of the Worlds, Forbidden Planet, etc. All these kind of movies and TV shows absolutely fueled my passion for all things weird and wonderful. Then I started to buy a number of books on ghosts, but at that time I didn't manage to pick up any serious books. It was all kind of the pan book of ghost stories, and these were obviously fictionalised accounts of ghostly tales. So I started to read other books by other people, and true ghost stories or allegedly true stories of ghosts and hauntings. And yeah, they were interesting, but I honestly felt that there were no validity to the claims in these books. I honestly felt, Chris, that the whole shooting match was a load of baloney. I didn't put any credence on these tales. I didn't put any credence on UFOs or Nessie or anything like that. And I decided to kind of prove that and go out in a one-man crusade to kind of prove this. But how wrong was I? As I've progressed through my life, researching these tales, obviously there's no smoke without fire, and I soon became involved in a number of cases, which we'll speak about today, which totally drew me off that sceptical fence. So it was a combination, as I say, of a young child growing up, reading all this stuff, watching stuff on TV, and then initially, when I formed my society, soon found out that there were strange things about, yes.
Obviously you started off as a bit of a sceptic in the area of the paranormal, but when you started to get drawn into it, because there's many facets of the paranormal as we know, what kind of part of it that kind of drew your attention the most?
Well, I think the main thing that really drew my attention was, of course, the paranormal. The ghosts, the poltergeists and the supernatural was the mainstay of my inquiring mind. That was followed by UFOs, of course, and of course our lovely Nessie up at Loch Ness, of course. That held my deep fascination as well. But even today, the mainstay of my real true interest does indeed lie in that paranormal field. Do we survive the grave? Is there a continuity after physical material death? Does life go on effectively? And thankfully, due to my research over 40 odd years, for me personally, I'm now a spiritualist. I firmly believe in life after death only because of my research, speaking to clinical physicians and near-death experiences with patients and a whole range of different things. But it's the paranormal for me, yes.
What was your deciding factor to try and get the word out there? Once you started investigating and looking at some of the material that was out there and some of the cases that you found, what was the deciding factor for you to try and spread the word and try and get the word out there by actually writing books and getting the word out there, and even obviously forming the groups and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a simple fact, Chris, that the people have a right to know. Information is for the people and not filing cabinets. I've said that many, many times. The thing is, right, it's no good me researching all these cases, my fellow researchers, digging through all these case files and trying to get to the truth and then just filing it away. You've got to get that information out to the public. And it's up to the public to decide if there's any validity or any truth to these claims. The media say that I'm an expert. Not at all. I'm not an expert. Nothing can be further than the truth. I know nothing, absolutely nothing. The thing is, with my research and their society, we've been involved in this research. It doesn't make you an instantaneous expert. It just means that you're someone who has touched the fabric of these cases, and you've spoken, which I have, to many, many people here in the United Kingdom and in Europe, telling me fantastic tales. And it's these tales that we need to provide an answer for. Are they telling the truth? Are they trying to pull the wool over your eyes? Or is it indeed, very true cases of paranormal activity? The good thing about being a public lecturer, Chris, is that people after my lectures come to me, and I guess the fellow guest speakers, and say, you know what, Malcolm, I've never told my husband about this, but I'm going to tell you. And they start to unload, these wonderful stories, which has sat with them perhaps for years and years and years, and are only now coming out. And these stories deserve to get out there. So that's basically, that was a deciding factor. And I do that through writing my books and also my lectures, etc. It's not a case of, look at me. You hardly make any money writing books. That's fellow researchers here in the UK, unless you're like Whitley Strieber or something, But no, I mean, the books are purely to get these stories out and say, look, folks, have a look. You don't have to believe a word of this, but by God, these people have had terrifying experiences. And there are many people out there in Scotland and the rest of the world don't know what to do. Who do I go to? Who do I tell? People will laugh at me, So for every one person that comes forward, Chris, and maybe two or three or more behind that person saying, nah, no me, I'm not going forward with my story, no way. And it's a great shame. Even people like myself and my fellow colleagues have been absolutely ridiculed in the press, I've been mickey taken by the media, etc. It's sadly par for the course, I guess, it's just one of these things. You've got to get yourself out there. But that was a deciding factor. Get these books out. Get that information out. The people have a right to know.
Do you feel that when you are approached by people who haven't talked in the past about their experiences, when they maybe see you in a lecture and then they'll think to contact you, is it like a weight has been lifted off them?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. Yeah, as a way. You can actually see that. You can see it in their face, seriously. You can see them, just the way their body action is, the body movements, and they just want to unfold these stories, and it allows them to finally come to grips with that. The sad thing is, of course, is that they're looking for answers, And like I say, I'm not an expert. I don't hold all the cards with all the information, with all the answers. And it'd be a wise man indeed that truly can say that, Yeah, for sure, I've got my own ideas and my own speculations, which we'll come to throughout the show. But that's all they are, Chris. They're just pure speculations on my behalf. Does it provide a satisfactory answer? Some would say so, and others would not. So I guess it's a dilemma that myself and my fellow colleagues have to face on a day-to-day basis. And all we can say to these people who come to me to unload these stories is, well, here's what I think. It may not be true, it may not be the way you want it to be, but at least, fingers crossed, it will give you some, I'm not saying closure, that'd be a hard thing to say, but it will certainly give you some semblance of where I'm coming from as a guy who's been embroiled in this for over 40 years. And I hope that what I say to that gentleman or lady will help along the way, you know.
We all know that there's most families, well, I can't believe anyways, they've always got a ghost story or a UFO story tucked away somewhere. But I always do believe that everybody's got some type of story to tell, and it's just obviously trying to find what that story is, or them being willing to actually talk about it.
That's so true, Chris. I mean, you could go out in the street and you could speak to a stranger and just ask the question. Not you would, but say, for instance, you did. And that person might say, no, not to me, my friend. I've never seen a ghost, but I'll tell you what, my Uncle Harry has. So, you know, somebody's got an uncle or an auntie or a second auntie who's got a story to tell. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why you love it, Chris, and your group and myself and my colleagues love it as well. There's always somebody with a story. But let us not forget, we need to know for sure if that story has any validity.
In all the years you've been investigating the paranormal, what validation have you had in the terms of any sightings or experiences yourself?
Oh, I've got so many, Chris, so many. And I have shared this with other shows, etc. But obviously you have a new listening base. So I'm happy to go through a couple of, for instances, you know. If we're talking what's really perplexed me the most, probably the top of the tree, and you know, you may have heard it elsewhere, but I'll say it for your own listeners, was when I lived in England. I've just recently moved back to Scotland after 23 years living in England. I just came back the end of February this year, 2021. And but whilst I was down in England, I put on a lot of conferences and I did a lot of lectures. We did our own SPI lectures in London. And a lady came forward at the close of one of my meetings in London. She says, Malcolm, would you like to see dead people? I went, what? Yeah, of course, you know. And to cut a very long story short, but it certainly is, I went to Chingford in the outskirts of London, and to this lady's house. And she says, Malcolm, we've got a psychic. He's going to be visiting the house later tonight, and he's going to go into trance. But I need to show you a couple of rooms upstairs just so you can see what's happening. And she took us into one bedroom, and there was a little glass case, wooden case with glass shelves, and on that was rings, medals, etc., and with little ties on it. And I says, what's that? And she says, Malcolm, that's pure. Well, it's things that fell out into the seance room. Apports. Oh, yes, I know what the apport is. Well, it's fell into the seance room, and when you go to pick it up, it's really, really hot. And we just decided to catalogue this, you know. And then she took us into the main bedroom where the visiting psychic was going to be doing his stuff. And it was just a normal bedroom. There was only two pieces of furniture in there. A tall, slim, slender bedroom unit with a small red ambient light on top of it. And then at the far corner of the room, where the two corners join, there was a big black sheet covering that corner to the other corner. And behind that was a plastic chair. And next to that was a small chest of drawers. And she says, yeah, when the psychic comes, you'll meet him in a moment, Malcolm. He's going to go into trance on that chair. And I says, okay, that's fine. Can I check the walls and the floor? What? What do you mean? So I sounded out the walls to see if there were any hidden cavities. You know, it might secrete a kind of tape recorder. I knocked the floors and everything. I tried my very best to make sure there were not any hidden devices to kind of fool me. And on the wall of this room, there was these little silver tiny bells, which will become apparent in a moment. So anyway, this psychic had turned up, and he looked quite nervous, actually. And I patted him down to make sure that he wasn't secreting any telescopic rods or anything like that, you know, any Paul Daniels box of tricks, etc. And we sat him behind this black curtain, and we strapped his his wrists and his legs to the chair by heavy Velcro straps. And he took his shoes off and his white socks was protruding underneath this black cloth. So then we started to, on the advice of the psychic and that, we started to sing songs like Roll Out the Barrel, old English songs, and just to create that ambience. And then she turned the lights off, and with the red ambient light, your face got accustomed to, what was in the room. Now, I was sitting with 3 other people in similar white plastic chairs facing the corner of the room with this black curtain. And then suddenly these little bells on the wall started to tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. And then these voices, Chris, male, female, young, old, it was abounding everywhere in the room. Above your head, under your chin, under your chair, next to your ear, everywhere, And I went, okay, who's throwing their voice here? This is pretty clever, because I'm always, even though I firmly believe in a life after death, I'm still skeptical. You better believe it, I'm still skeptical. And so I'm seeing who's throwing their voice, and everybody was amazed as I was. And then suddenly, I kid you not, it's like something out of a movie, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. A face moulded into the very fabric of this black cloth and pushed itself out into the, well, not into the middle of the room because it wasn't that tall a cloth, and as it rose up, you could see the guy was still sitting down. His feet was planted firmly on the floor. It was a horrible, evil face, moving and twisting, and then it just went back the way, and the cloth fell down again. And then at that point, there was a tremendous burst of cold wind pervaded the whole room. Your breath was physically freezing up in front of you. You could physically see, as you breathed out, the breath was more or less freezing up. It was so cold, unbelievable. Then at that point, there was a small chest of drawers next to that cloth, next to that sheet, and it started to rise up slowly into the air, right up to the ceiling, and slowly traverse a few feet at the top of the ceiling, Chris, and lowered itself down and fell on my toes. And I was absolutely gobsmacked, as anybody would be. But I've got to tell you the truth, and what I'm about to say, you'll laugh, and I dare see your listeners all laugh, but this is what happened. Tell the truth, Malcolm, this is what happened. Mm-hmm. A voice boomed out. Was Mr. Robinson impressed by this? And I said, look, I'd be more impressed if you took it back. We shall see what we can do. Now, I did the cardinal sin, Chris. You should never, and you know this yourself, you should never, ever interfere with psychic energy when it's happening. So what I did is I hooked my finger under the top lid of this chest of drawers, and I said to myself, you ain't gone nowhere. You're staying with me. Okay, right, move it. Move the chest of drawers, on you go. And nothing happened. Not a thing. This is ridiculous. I'm saying to myself, Chris, why did I bother with it? Why did I do this? And then suddenly, after about 2.5, 3, 4 minutes, you could feel it moving. And I'm with my finger, I'm trying to pull it back, and I couldn't hold it any longer. And it just slipped like a hot knife through butter and floated right up into the air and went back the way. Now, whilst this is a lovely wee story on the radio show, how I wish you, Chris, and your listeners had have been in that room at that time, because it's only then that people will say, you know what, Malcolm, you were right.
Yeah.
Telling a story of this nature, which is so true, is nice. But, is it proof? The sad thing is I was not allowed to bring in any video equipment or audio tape equipment, and, which was a great, great shame. But even if I had have done, Chris, even if I had have magically captured this on videotape, this chest of drawers rising up into the air, would the skeptics of the world have believed this? They would have said, Malcolm, well done. 10 out of 10, you've done that on computer. And, sometimes you can't win,
You sound a bit like myself in terms of people ask me, do I believe? I believe, but I'm a sceptical believer. You know what I mean? So I'll be at the point where obviously I need to be convinced. I mean, at the same time, I do believe. So, no, totally interesting. I take it, if that maybe runs into the next question, after investigating so many cases throughout your time within the paranormal, what cases perplex you the most? you found
Well,
the strangest?
there've been a few, and if you're happy for me to rattle off a few, for instance,
Totally.
I was up at, well, I got a phone call from a chap, sadly he's passed away now, but he says, Malcolm, I'm using a torch to flash into the night sky and I'm getting bursts of light coming down. Would you like to come up to Altby in Wester Ross to see this? And so I kind of I killed two birds with one stone, because I was going down in the Loch Ness submarine on this particular weekend, and I says, well, Altby, it's still a fair journey for Inverness, but I could do it. So anyway, this chap came down, and after I did my Loch Ness submarine dive, he took us up in his car, and we drove about 3 hours or so in his old ramshackle car, away up to Altby in Wester Ross. After a cup of tea, we drove out into the countryside. The beautiful, what a lovely part of the world that is. I'd never been to Wester Ross before as a Scots guy, incredible. And it was a lovely starry night. And now, just to set the scene, Chris, the only other guy I know who did this was a chap called Arthur Shuttlewood, who was a newspaper editor in Warminster in Wiltshire, when Wiltshire had a spate of UFO sightings back in the 60s, just like Bonnybridge.
Yeah.
And he was using a torch to flash into the night sky, and he too was getting things coming down. So there we were, standing in this lovely Scottish countryside, and he says, Malcolm, this is, nonchalantly, this is what I do. I just get this torch here and look at this, and I kid you not, No sooner had he did that, then this tremendous column of light. Now, I want to say to yourself and your listeners, it wasn't a solid object. It was a column of structured light. I call it in a sense like a rope ladder of light, because it was tumbling down, but it was solid. Mm-hmm. And there's me, with the binoculars and the camera round my neck, looking at this thing. I was like a cartoon character with a jaw. My chin was on the ground next to my shoes. I'm like, what? And, sometimes you can't get out of that situation.
Yeah.
And then no sooner had it done that, and it zoomed up into the sky. And now this didn't come from an aircraft. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't a drone. This is back in 1994. It was none of those things. And obviously, I just couldn't reach the camera in time to get a photograph of this thing. Mm-hmm. With any investigation, and you'll hear me talk about other cases tonight, but with any UFO investigation, the first port of call is the local airports, the national airports, to see if anything was flying in the air at that time at that location. You talk to the local police to see if any members of the public has notified them of something unusual. Mm-hmm. You would then, look at the local flying clubs. You would look to the Ministry of Defence with any air exercises ongoing at the time. Not that they'll probably tell you, but you still got to do it. So there's all these different avenues which we did on that occasion, and with the cases coming up that I'll tell you about, and nothing was in the air at that time. And that was a strange one, and then another UFO sighting that I had was, when was that, about 10 years ago, maybe not as much as that. I was giving a lecture to a group called Probe in Blackpool. And after the conference, myself and a guy called Mike Halliwell and some other guys went out to Blackpool Beach. It was night, it was dark, and we stood on the sand dunes looking out at the sea. And it was, again, fortunately, it was a lovely starry sky. And suddenly we saw this white ball of light coming across the sea, maybe about, maybe 1,000 feet above our heads, at a distance initially. And we're looking at this, and not one of us spoke, because we all knew we're looking for the navigation lights. Mm-hmm. We're looking to hear the drone of an aircraft. We never heard that. We never heard we never saw any navigation lights. And then it was right above our head, so we're kind of craning our neck to look up. No navigation lights, no sound. And it flew over, and admittedly, you do have Blackpool Airport, maybe about 400 or 500 yards across the road, mm-hmm. but it flew over that airport and went away. And that's the thing about UFO sightings. They're not all structured craft or what have you. They are balls of light, as I'm sure your listeners will know. Mm-hmm. And, there's also the sighting at Craiglusker Reservoir near Dunfermline, where a chap who was an artist, he was a painter, he went down to this reservoir with his camera to take some photographs of this lovely reservoir. And his object was to go home, look at his pictures, and paint from the pictures. That's what his intentions were. So he's down there at Craiglusker Reservoir, and he suddenly became aware of a kind of a buzzing sound. And he never paid too much of attention to that because he thought it was perhaps the electricity pylons that traverse that area. If you stand underneath a big, transmitter pylon, you'll hear a soft, resonant buzz. Yeah. And so he started not paying too much attention to it. And then suddenly it got louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. What is that? So he turned round to see where the sound was coming from. And he was stunned, like I was at Altby. He was stunned to see initially this two-tiered grey object, like a hat shape, like a bowler hat, but just with a flat bowler hat, for want of a better word. So it had a top part and a lower part. And then he found himself, Jenny Randall's a famous British authoress, she says that when somebody is in close proximity to a UFO, they find themselves in a strange environment. She calls it the Oz factor. Yeah. And he says, the witness said to me, he says, Malcolm, God almighty, I felt as if I was in one of those Victorian bell jars, only about 8 or 9, 10 feet. It encapsulated me. I never heard any bird song. I never heard the low rumble of the traffic on a nearby road. Total silence. It was just me and this object. I couldn't even reach for my camera, he said. And then suddenly the object, or the top part of the object, telescoped into the main body, and it tilted, and it was gone in seconds. Thankfully, just before it left, he managed to take 2 photographs. And he was so disappointed because by that time, the top part had telescoped into the main body of the object, so the top part doesn't look so tall. It was a wind-on camera. It was 3 digital. It was film he was using. And the second shot was just a dot in the sky. But we sent the main photograph off to Ground Saucer Watch in Phoenix, Arizona. And their analysis team said that this object was indeed flying. It was in excess of 30 feet. It wasn't an aircraft. It wasn't a helicopter. And for want of a better word, it was a UFO. And again, with the checks with the airports and the police, nothing was in the air at that time. And I mean, there's so many cases. There's the Bonnybridge phenomena, the Deckman Woods incident. There's so many cases we could speak about.
Have you got any theories on, just going to divert a wee bit for that, on the Oz factor? I mean, because you hear the Oz factor happening in many paranormal cases. You hear it in Bigfoot cases, you hear it in other cryptid cases, you hear it in UFO cases, or even like fairy cases in the past. It's such a prominent thing that you also hear in a lot of paranormal encounters.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a very, very true point. It's not just indicative of UFO sightings. It can be someone that's sighting a ghost. And I think, you know what, I think perhaps maybe it's like partly the shock factor. Your body goes into shock and it numbs all the kind of senses, well, most of the senses. And it just, you're just transfixed on whatever you are looking at, be it Bigfoot, Sasquatch, ghost, poltergeist, UFO. Your senses seem to either just go into shock for a moment, and then they're also heightened as well. Mm-hmm. And I guess the Oz factor is a great wee way to state that kind of effect on witnesses.
You must have seen a lot of strange cases throughout your time, investigations, and for all different sections of the paranormal. What would keep Malcolm Robinson up at night?
A really good poltergeist, I guess. I mean, I would love to be in an environment where a poltergeist was happening, and just see chairs flying about and things falling about, coming off shelves and all that. I mean, there's a lot of footage on YouTube and the internet of this, but it's so easy to trick people, with a small string, a piece of fishing gut tied to something and just pulling it away off camera. Oh, look at that, wow. It's so easy. So, I mean, I think for me, yes, probably a poltergeist, or maybe even a full-blooded apparition just suddenly materialising there. I mean, I have seen half a leg appear in the Tollbooth jail in Stirling. We were doing an investigation there one night, and I just nonchalantly turning round to talk to one of my investigators, and my attention was drawn to, next to the guy was this white stocking with a black shoe and a big silver buckle. And then you kind of go, what?
It's
Then you
funny.
look again, and it's not there, you know.
That's exactly
And,
what I pictured there when you said the leg. I'm not kidding you.
aye.
That was exactly the same description. Just what I remembered there. I mean, that's mad.
Yeah, so I mean, that's you know, something that would be scary. I mean, the Socky Poltergeist case. That's my latest book, my 8th book on Scotland's best poltergeist case. I was only 3 years of age at that time. It occurred in 1960, but how I wish I had been involved in that, to see the enormity of not just what happened in that poor little girl's house, but also, you know, the poltergeist followed her to school. It followed her to another house in Bedford, in the Dollar in Clackmannanshire as well. So that would be something else to see that.
Is any case in from a case directly affected you? You heard going back to the past cases with John Keel, for example, where he got a lot of strange phone calls, or it almost, you could maybe get something physical, or it could be a psychological aspect here.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess because I've put myself directly in the ballpark of paranormal phenomena, that when it does happen, it scares you so much. I better watch my choice of words there. And I'll give you a few, for instances. You know, this is to answer your question, has any case directly affected me? Well, one case, we came back from an investigation somewhere in central Scotland, and I went back to my house, and it was late at night, and I was just kind of trying to wind down. My brain was all still actively of what had been happening. And then 3 loud bangs, loud knocks came from behind my head. And it was it's a stone wall, Chris.
Yeah.
And behind that is just empty space. You know, it's a semi-detached house. It was empty space. And then on another occasion in Stirling, our psychic said to me, Malcolm, oh my goodness me, don't you feel spirit in the room tonight? I says, nope, not at all. Nope. You are joking. It's everywhere. Nope. And she says, okay, stand over there at the other end of the room. And it was in semi-darkness, Chris, you know, but again, your eyes were focused. And she says, extend your arm and ask spirit to touch you. And so I did that, and I can honestly say that all my fellow investigators were definitely at the other side of the room. So there's me, like an idiot, standing with my arm out the other side of the room. I says, okay, if there's anybody from spirit side, please touch the back of my hand. Nothing happened for about 2 minutes, and I was ready just to, you know, come out of that and say, what a lot of nonsense, when suddenly a tremendous pressure pressed down firmly on my hand, and it was so big a pressure, Chris, actually, it was like one of these Bavarian people with the big jugs of beer and slapping their thighs. It slapped my thigh. And, I mean, I've always said jokingly at my conferences, perhaps the best piece of kit that a researcher, a ghostbuster, call them what you will, needs to have in their armoury is a pair of bicycle clips. Now think about it. And there was another time when we were doing a case in Kirkintilloch near Glasgow, and it was an ex-police officer's house, and my goodness me, what a lovely, lovely big house this fella had. When we went in, Chris, every single wall had a crucifix hanging down from it. Every door had a photostat copy of the Lord's Prayer. And I went, oh my God, we clearly are in for a show tonight. Mm-hmm. To cut a very long story short, because I've got to kind of trim all these stories. To cut a long story short, as we were walking into one of the upper bedrooms, it was like somebody had brushed my hair with their fingers. Mm-hmm. And I turned round and I says to one of the investigators, you know, to put the light on, because the lights were off, and I'm thinking maybe it's a piece of plaster hanging down from the ceiling. Have I walked into a kid's airplane airfix model? But when he put the light on, there were absolutely nothing above my head, and so that affected me for sure, you know. And case, I mean, some of these stories I have told in other shows, but another case that did affect me was we were dealing with a haunting again in a town in Clackmannanshire, and we were in this bedroom. This poor lady was subjected to so much problems with the ghosts and stuff. And so we're sitting in kind of semi-darkness, nothing was happening. And again, I say to myself, because believe you me, the psychic phenomenon that we've attended happens only one out of 10 times. 9 times out of 10, nothing happens. But that one time, Chris, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that one time makes it all worthwhile. It really does. And what happened on that occasion was that sitting in darkness, nothing's happening, I'm ready to go home, and then the whole room illuminated, exploded in a tiny pinpricks of white light, like a November the 5th child sparkler. You know, these handheld sparklers?
Yeah.
It was all over the room, all over the walls, all over the ceiling, all over the carpets, all over everywhere. And I turned to my the psychic, and I says, "What on earth is this?" And she kind of laughed at me as if I should know better. Malcolm, come on now, that's pure psychic energy. Is it really? Is it like a wee kid, you know, from his teacher trying to learn a lesson? And then it only lasted about 19, 20, 21 seconds, like a dimmer switch. It slowly faded away, and we were left back in blankness. So we raced to the VCR machine. This is just a wee bit pre-digital. VCR machine, press stop, rewind and play. Nothing. We hadn't captured it. The cameras didn't capture it. Again, I refer back to what I said earlier. If we had captured it, Chris, would the skeptics have accepted it or said, "You've done that on computer, Malcolm, good job"? So sometimes you can't win, you know.
See, that's it. We're in this, the kind of times now where people can fake stuff and nobody believes any UFO pictures you get these days as well. You know what I mean? And we're probably in the unfortunate realm where we're left to rely on governments to actually show us stuff so we can say it's proof, because you know there's that much stuff out there that people won't believe these days.
And that's the thing, you're quite correct. You know, you can get apps now to import a ghost into your family picture or a UFO. The good news is, and I've said it before, we are indeed living in Steven Spielberg's DreamWorks laboratory age. And all the technologies we've got, you can make a UFO or a ghost look so real. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, the same apparatus, the same equipment can be used to find out if it is real or not real. Mm-hmm. Edge separation, pixel enhancement, color contour enhancement. You know, you can really look into the depths of any given photograph. I can see a small string supporting a UFO model from a tree. So whilst you could be very clever to construct a fake UFO, the same technology, thank goodness, can unmask it as well, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Even you'll still, even regardless if you get the smoking gun, the skeptics will still not probably believe it in that sense. Some of them anyway, you know what they're like.
Oh yes, absolutely.
When you get obviously people perceiving the paranormal and having encounters, all kind of after different kinds of encounters, what kind of theories have you got on why some people can perceive these things and others don't? I mean, you can maybe have a group of people who maybe have a combined UFO sighting and maybe half them only see it and some don't see it, and that could fall in line with a lot of different paranormal events. Have you any theories on that?
Absolutely, and I've never veered away from this theory, and I never ever will. And that theory is that the more psychic you are, the more attuned you'll be to see, be it a UFO or a ghost, possibly more in the paranormal field. I've said it many times. You get to have 6 people in a haunted house, 3 people will see a spirit in the corner of the room, and the other 3 will go, "What? What? I can't see anything." And it's maybe because they're not on that kind of wavelength. It sounds a wee bit Steven Spielberg and Hollywood, but they may be not on that wavelength. It's like the old radio, Chris, you know, before the DAB radios. You turn the dial, you've got radio 1, right? Turn it to radio 2. Hold on, we'll get it. Turn it to radio 2. And you're getting all this mishmash of stations. Then finally you've tuned into radio 2 because you're on that frequency, because you're on that wavelength. And so that's my take on it. I'll never veer from it. And I do think if you are psychic, now some people may be born with that ability. Some people can develop it. But I do believe that for me is the answer. The more psychically attuned and aware you are, you will see something.
Do you think Scotland stands out in the realms of paranormal sightings and reports than other places around the world, or even within the UK?
Well, it's certainly up there with the rest of the world for sure. Scotland as a nation has a history of haunted castles, etc., as we all know. And, you know, as far as window areas, we have Bonnybridge in Stirlingshire in central Scotland, which has been what some people would say is a window area for a number of years. Why that should be, we really don't know. We have that in the Pennines, down in England, Gulf Breeze in Pensacola, in Florida. There's certain hotspots or window areas on this planet that seem to attract a higher concentration of UFO reports than anywhere else. And of course, the reason is, why is this? And I don't have the answers why Bonnybridge was singled out. Not just Bonnybridge, like Falkirk, Slamanan, and all the little towns and villages all around it. But it kicked off in 1992, but I was doing research in that area in 1982, 10 years before Bonnybridge hit the world headlines. So, but certainly, yeah, Scotland as a nation has its fair share of ghosts, that's for sure. And thankfully, I've been involved with a few of them, not them all, of course.
Talking about Scotland and UFOs, we obviously we're going to talk tonight a wee bit about the Bonnybridge and Falkirk. Do it in inverted commas, like the Falkirk Triangle or the Bonnybridge Triangle. If you want to maybe we could maybe run through some accounts and what happened in Bonnybridge and maybe chronologically. I know obviously a lot of people think it started in the 90s, as you said. It was back in the early 80s where you first actually started seeing reports and stuff within that area. Yeah,
for me, when I was living in Scotland at the time, I spoke to a lady who we call a repeater witness, and she was a lady who saw UFOs on a regular basis, and she stayed near Falkirk. And, I, honestly, when I interviewed her, I felt that she was sincere, she was honest. I did, go to her home a few times, and then late at night we were looking at the sky, but I never saw anything, and neither did she on those occasions. It's always the way, isn't it? So that was in 1982. Then in 1992, I was listening to a radio broadcast on Central FM, a radio station which initially was based, I think it was in Falkirk at the time, I'm not sure. And it had Councillor Billy Buchanan on, and Billy Buchanan was talking about these UFO reports, and I just knew that I had to get involved, So I immediately contacted Billy Buchanan, and he was so glad to talk to me. Here was somebody who could physically help him and help his constituents. And what we have to bear in mind, Chris, is he was elected to serve the people of Bonnybridge in any way, shape or form. He did not expect in a million years to be dealing with people chapping on his door and saying, look, I've seen a UFO, what are you going to do? He thought it was people were taking the mickey. But as more phone calls and letters and knocks on the door happened, he soon realised, whoa, what is going on here? So anyway, I assisted, I was one of the main researchers to assist Billy Buchanan on that. Ron Halliday did come along as well. Lovely guy, nice researcher. And but in the main, I followed. Me and Billy was everywhere. We did so much TV, so many radio. And then in in the early 90s, it would have been 1993 possibly, we did a lecture in a local hotel, and it was absolutely rammed. It was packed to the gunnels, not just by interested people who came to find out what was going on, but also by witnesses. I gave a talk. We had a Glasgow rock group called CE4 who write and perform songs about UFOs. They do that whilst I talk about it. They sing about it, and my God, the music's amazing. CE4, check them out. And so we did that, and then 1994 we did the Falkirk Town Hall conference, and there was over 800 people who was at the Falkirk Town Hall to listen to me, to listen to English researcher Philip Mantle, and again the Glasgow rock group CE4. There were camera crews from all over the world. The people were standing at the sites and sitting in the aisles and all the rest of it, breaking all the health and safety rules you could ever dream up. And it was a wonderful occasion because we got more witnesses from there. Then we started to get camera crews from Japan, and this is all logged, this is all true, it's in the books and everything. Japan, Australia, Germany, etc., all wanting to tell their own viewers back in Germany, back home, what was happening in this small Scottish town of Bonnybridge, And we had a number of witnesses. There was a chap who was driving in his car towards Castle Carry Viaduct. It's a railway viaduct in the Bonnybridge area. and it was getting dark. And as he was driving along the road, he saw this large black triangular object sitting above. It's slowly moving down from the sky and then sat above the viaduct. It was then joined by a secondary and similar object, triangular, point to point. So he's slowing down, he's craning his neck through the windscreen of the car to look up at this. Mm-hmm. Other motorists were doing the same, incidentally. And then suddenly both objects, they were gone. They just screamed away in seconds. And then we had this family, the Sloggett family, that's right. They were having a wee walk one night on the moors behind Bonnybridge. You have High Bonnybridge and Low Bonnybridge. Mm-hmm. High Bonnybridge, you have a lot of farmers' fields, and we used to do a lot of sky watching there with fellow researchers. Anyway, the mother, the son, and the daughter were walking along this little path, up at the moors, and then suddenly, and again, this is their testimony. I'm not putting any salt and pepper on the story. This is their testimony. A blue ball of light came down from the sky and sat in a farmer's field. It was about maybe 3 times the size of a basketball. And as it sat in this field, Chris, the farmer's wire fence at the side of it started to vibrate and shake. Needless to say, they were gone. They were out of there in seconds. And as they rushed away, this tremendous burst of white light came out of some trees. And, I mean, these are just a few witnesses. Another quick, for instance, was a chap in Denny. And Denny is still part of the Falkirk Triangle. I don't like that word, incidentally. Mm-hmm. It's not a triangle at all. It's just an area. I wouldn't put a triangle on it. Anyway, this chap is driving in his car from Denny to Stirling. He was going to Stirling to collect his wife from the bingo. In his car was his 2 young sons. So he's driving along this road towards Stirling. And funnily enough, again, fields on either side. And then suddenly his kids screamed out, Dad, what, a helicopter plane? What's that? And the father slowed down and he looked out of the car to the left and he saw, actually it was very similar to the gentleman saw in the Craiglusker Reservoir, a 2-tiered object, although it had a kind of red, a green and a blue light on its underside. Now he knew straight away, this wasn't a conventional helicopter or an aircraft of any description. And then, as if the story couldn't get any more bizarre, it did. Because suddenly, an instantaneous fog bank, tall fog bank, not just lying along the road, vertically standing up with a straight edge to it, straight edge fog bank, appeared in front of his car. His car screamed through that, and he went on to his destination of Stirling. So when we interviewed the guy, we said, well, did you notice any time difference? No, not that I can recall. I got there on time. And obviously I'm saying that because you and I know that on some occasions there's missing time associated with some, not all, UFO incidents, more so the A70 case, which we can talk about if you like shortly. And but that was a bizarre one. Bonnybridge at the height of the early 1990s was truly awash with objects in the sky, from balls of light falling down, from cylindrical objects to your classic flying saucer shape. There was a kind of object, and again, got to say it as it is, tell the truth, no salt and pepper, an object like a Toblerone, but in the box, a Toblerone shape flying silently and slowly across the Stirlingshire skies. The sightings have kind of diminished over the years. I mean, you still see the odd one back and forward. Billy Buchanan he's now not a councillor anymore, he's a provost, he's went up in the rank and field, so to speak. He's been over to Roswell, New Mexico, trying to get the town of Bonnybridge twinned with Roswell. I think we're hoping that may happen in due course. He was trying to get a visitor centre put into Bonnybridge so that because people come from all over the world, Chris, just to see this wee Scottish town, and they're nothing. Once you walk through the high street, that's it, you're done. So he was hoping to have a wee kind of visitor centre with photographs and interaction videos and what have you. But again, that's all maybe pie in the sky unless the lottery funding people may inject some money into it. But it's, my plans now that I'm back in Scotland again, and that I do intend to hold more sky watches on the moors at Bonnybridge, sky watches over in Fife at Falkland Hill, where another spectacular case happened a few years ago, and also Decmont Woods and various other places.
In Bonnybridge, you think obviously the media attention it got, it helped sightings in a sense where more people would report them or more people looked up. They seen what was happening in the press, so they would be more akin to look at the sky. You know what I mean? Because you people that turn around and say, I've never seen a UFO, I've never seen that. Well, how often do they look? You know what I mean? So you think that helped it a bit in a sense as well?
Well, it did. I mean, it did to a degree, because once people were aware of what was going on, yeah, you're right. They went out in their back gardens and had a look. And let us not forget, the vast majority of UFO reports can be easily identified, as high as 95%. Mm-hmm. And Bonnybridge is on the flight path to both Glasgow and Edinburgh airports. Excuse me. And you also have Cumbernauld Airport very close by as well. So that area does receive a lot of air traffic, and we shouldn't forget that. And sadly, some people report seeing what they believe to be a UFO, and it's not. Maybe due to bad lighting conditions or the sunlight striking off the fuselage of an aircraft that takes away the wing. They think they're looking at something bizarre. The human sight is still fallible. Many people can be fooled by ordinary mundane things, and even when you look into the sky and into the clouds, you'll say, oh, that looks like a face. Oh, look at that, looks like a horse. Mm-hmm. The human mind is hardwired to see faces in anything. The patterns on your curtains, etc. You stare at it long enough, you'll see a face or whatever you may see. So, like any area in the world, it's had a lot of sightings. There's a lot of misidentifications as well.
Even on the cases where it was unmistakably a UFO, you've possibly done more investigating on what it wasn't and actually what it was to actually probably silence skeptics in a certain way. In that, is that kind of the main way to do it, to cross off everything what it was, even though it wasn't going to be, example, like a plane or something else. You would go through that due diligence to make sure that all these things were checked off in a sense, because obviously you would get the skeptics coming out after the case came out.
Absolutely. I mean, we do have, initially we have UFO sighting account forums, which has a lot of questions, a hell of a lot of questions, and people can, tick off the boxes on that. Were you wearing glasses? How good your eyesight? We even ask questions that maybe some people say, what? And that is, have you been on drugs? Do you smoke cannabis? We have to ask these questions because if you don't, the skeptics will say, did you ask him if he was smoking, cannabis? Was he on cocaine or anything? And no, we didn't ask that. There you go, Malcolm. Mm-hmm. So we have to inject those kind of personal questions into it. I mean, I remember once when I was living in London, this chap telephoned my house and says, look, wow, you got to come over to my house. I've got some fantastic evidence of UFOs. And the guy was serious, he sounded incredible. So myself and my partner at the time went over to his house, and he couldn't get the VHS tape in the machine quick enough. He was almost putting it in upside down. And eventually he did it, and he says, look. What we were looking at, Chris, was these columns of light coming up from the ground in the distance, above rooftops, I should say, and illuminating low-lying clouds. And it was doing a circular dance on the low-lying clouds. Mm-hmm. And he was jumping about. He was so excited. And me and my partner knew straight away who's going to tell him first. And I looked at my partner and she nodded. She says, no, you tell him. Okay, sir. I mean, what this looks like to me is it's laser light. What? It looks like laser lights illuminating a low-lying... No. It's not that at all. Listen, I thought you believed in UFOs, Mr. Robinson. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't believe that. My job is to get to the bottom of it, sir. So what are you trying to tell me? That's laser lights? Yes. And he more or less threw us out the house, Chris. And I'll tell you what, we found out that it was laser lights. There was a new discotheque that had opened about a mile away or so. Mm-hmm. And it was to kind of draw people in. They would have these laser lights and they were hitting a low-lying cloud. So the desire by some people to believe in these subjects is maybe even stronger than my desire to disprove them, but that's my job, yes. And the same with any researcher. You got to be sceptical. You've got to go in with a hard hat and ask those pertinent questions. And if you get thrown out of a house for doing so, then so be it. But you've got to be critical.
It must be quite hard, actually, telling people that they're wrong when they're that adamant they've got something and they're that excited at it. I mean, so it must be a hard task to actually tell them that it's a laser light or it is a plane or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So I can imagine you've been in some comfortable situations where you'd have to maybe tell people these things.
Oh yeah, I mean, another one comes to mind. My friends from Glasgow, the guys from rock group CE4, Brian McMullen and his son Brian as well, invited me up to Glasgow. They had a case on where a lady was seeing a lot of UFOs in the sky. This is even more fun. I shouldn't laugh, but I'm even thinking about it. So we went into this tenement building in Glasgow, and she made us a nice cup of tea and biscuits, and she was very sweet. She was lovely. She stayed alone. She was maybe about 70 odd, you know. And she says, "Oh yes." And she looked at her watch. "Oh, they'll be here any minute. They'll be here just now. You watch." And she pulled back the curtains, and over in the distance, there was this aircraft coming into land at Glasgow Airport in the distance, maybe 2 miles away or whatever it was, you know. "There it is. See." And then we're all looking at each other and went, "What? She's kidding us on. Surely she knows that's an aircraft. Come on." And she wasn't. And we said, "Madam, yes, that's actually an aircraft." "No, it's not." It is, honestly, you know, and it was, you saw the navigation lights flashing, Chris, you know, and sadly, you know, you're in this environment where you're bursting someone's bubble who thinks they're seeing aliens from wherever, and it's only, you know, the 737 coming in from London Gatwick to Glasgow Airport. So it does have a laugh now and again, you know.
Going back to the Falkirk area, well, I'd say obviously it did stretch from Falkirk to West Lothian to right across. I know in Stirlingshire. I mean, so it was quite a big area in central Scotland where a lot of this was. I'd still say concentrated because it's not a large line area. You know what I mean? All that area, when you look at it geographically, was the main flap in between like 92 or 94 or 95, and what kind of numbers were in between that for the cases that you were seeing roughly?
Well, that's a good point, because the reason it is a good point is I would safely say between 1992 and say 1998, there were upwards of maybe about 600 UFO sightings that came to me. Now, out of that, I would say probably half was the real deal. Now, 300 doesn't sound much. Sadly, you know, the newspapers just put an extra zero on it. We couldn't believe it. We said to the news, "Why are you doing this? It's not as much UFO sightings as that." "Yeah, but we've got to sell papers, Mr. Robinson." So me and Billy Buchanan was lambasted by fellow researchers saying that's never as much as that, you know, 3,000 or whatever it may be. We never said it was, you know. And we were getting all the grief from our colleagues, and we were in a terrible predicament for saying that, you know, these are people are reading the papers, and we never said that. We never said it was that. So I would safely say about 300. What I should have also pointed out, Chris, getting back briefly to the Bonnybridge sightings, is Billy Buchanan and I, Provost Buchanan and I, went down to 10 Downing Street with a petition to campaign to get the Prime Minister to open up a government inquiry into the UFO sightings in Bonnybridge. We were sick to death, getting nowhere with Donald Dewar and some other parliamentary people here in Scotland. So we went down to 10 Downing Street with the petitions. And, you know, we did that with John Major. We got nowhere. Tony Blair, nowhere. Gordon Brown, nowhere. David Cameron, nowhere. Now, we elected, that's the British people elected these people into Parliament, and they're not helping us at all. All we got from these Prime Ministers via the MOD was a tired old statement that as these objects, these UFOs, do not constitute a threat to the defence of the United Kingdom, the British government will not open up a governmental inquiry into these sightings. And that really frustrated us, Chris, because some of these sightings in Bonnybridge were so close you could have thrown a stone at, you know. So we will still campaign, we will still try our best to turn our files, our video footage, our photographs over to anybody in Parliament who wants to investigate this. And I hope that when Scotland gets its independence, that the new Scottish government will open up a Scottish government inquiry into these sightings. That's my hope anyway.
It's a big part of the UFO history in Scotland.
Yeah.
Overall, the paranormal stuff in Scotland is vast. I mean, this is a part of it, but I think it's good highlighting this area of it to maybe newcomers to the subject. I mean, because they'll maybe be looking over the pond at the things that's going on in America now. You know what I mean? And no realise what's actually been on their doorstep for so long, and it's still here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why it was great when I had the opportunity to be the first Scots person to lecture in America, which I did a few years ago at Laughlin, Nevada, at a big conference here. And it was fantastic for me to present to the American public cases like the A70, Decmont Woods incident, the Fife case, and various other Scottish cases, because these guys over there, they don't know about all these wonderful cases we have here in Scotland. And so it was a pleasure to talk to them about it. And coming off the stage, I was mobbed by people, tell me more, because you can only say so much in your allotted time,
Yeah.
And they were really thirst for knowledge for what was happening in Scotland. And of course, you're then talking about ghosts and poltergeists, and it was just great to do that. Tell the American people.
When you mentioned obviously the A70 case, because that was run about the same time, and it's still within a swathe of land. It's geographically not too far from the rest of the sightings.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak about anything that happened there in the A70 case?
Yes, I can do. I mean, I dare say some of your listeners may have heard this before, but for those listeners who haven't, and I dare say they can't be that many, effectively it happened in 1992, in August 1992. Two friends, Gary Wood and Colin Wright, were driving from Edinburgh down to the small village of Tarbrax in West Lothian. And as you leave the built-up city of Edinburgh and its grey tenement buildings, etc., the road extends down into kind of farmland. You've got fields on either side. And they were taking a satellite system to their friends, and they were going to set up that. And they left around about, 10:30 or thereabouts. And they were driving. Again, I must stress that these guys had no interest in UFOs at that time whatsoever. They had heard about it, like we all have, on the radio and the TV, but they had no passion for it. All that changed on that August evening in 1992. For as they were travelling down the A70, they passed on their left Harper Rig Reservoir, then they approached a blind bend in the road, and there, sitting above this blind bend was this black, shiny, two-tiered object, which both men again knew this was not an aircraft or a helicopter. And they went, whoa, what is this? Oh my God. Now, rather than do a 3-point turn and get the hell out of there and get away back to Edinburgh, he says, no, we're going to Tarbrax. Gary floored it, put his foot on the gas and drove underneath this object. And as the car was directly underneath this hovering object, the object emitted like a silver shimmering curtain of mist that just fell from beneath this object and hit the car roof. And as soon as it hit the car roof, both men were enveloped in total and inky blackness. They couldn't see their hand in front of their face. They couldn't see the dashboard of the car. They couldn't see each other. They thought they were dead. Seconds later, or what appeared to be seconds later, they regained their sight. Gary's struggling with the steering wheel, trying to keep the car on the road. And he was on the other side of the road, he was on the right-hand side of the road. He should have been on the left. And they just they drove away to the destination of Tarbrax and thumped on the occupant's door. And the occupant actually had to wake them out of their bed, and they came down and she says, what time do you call this? You should have been here hours ago. Come on, what time is this? Look at the time. They were an hour and a half late, Chris. The journey should only have taken about 35 minutes, and they're an hour and a half late. What's going on here? So they proceeded to go into the occupant's house, and they began to tell him the stupid, crazy story of what they had seen above the A70. And, of course, they laughed for a wee bit, and then they realised, wait a minute, they know Gary and Colin. They wouldn't make up this. So they stopped laughing, and they realised, hey, these guys have seen something. That night and subsequent nights thereafter, both Gary and Colin in their dream world saw these small grey creatures coming into their dreamscape. They then found scars on their body that previously were not there, scoop-like marks, and we all know our bodies. Where the hell did this come from? And Gary said to himself, well, who do I contact? Who do you touch? Do you tell the police? Who do you go to? he decided his best course of action would be to go to his local library, and they picked out a book by Jenny Randalls, and it had our Strange Phenomena Investigations address in there. And he contacted me, and I'll try and make this story brief because it's quite a long story. Mm-hmm. He contacted me, and at that time I advocated the use of hypnotic regression. I'm a wee bit unsure now, but at that time I was fully fledged in it because the police use it, They used it in a case a few years ago in a bank robbery. Mm-hmm. The getaway car, there were bystanders there, and he says, "What was the number plate?" "Oh, I don't know. I don't know. But under hypnosis, bang, bang, bang. Mm-hmm. Number plate, bangs. Simply through hypnosis." Mm-hmm. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I said to Gary, "Look, would you like to go under hypnosis just to see if perhaps something else happened that night?" "Oh, Malcolm." "Malcolm, absolutely. We'll try anything. We need to know." I says, "Oh, look, you may not like what you hear under hypnosis. It may be nothing. But it will unlock the sluice gates of your mind, and who goodness knows what might come out. Are you still prepared to do that?" "Yes." "Okay." So we use a qualified hypnotherapist, I'm cutting a long story short, qualified hypnotherapist, and we took, excuse me, we took both Gary and Colin back to that August evening in 1992, and then a typical abduction scenario unfolded. Mm-hmm. They said, and this is under hypnosis, the conscious recall was only ever seeing the craft. Under hypnosis, they claimed they were taken possibly out of the car by these small grey beings, roughly 3.5 to 4 feet tall, childlike bodies, grey, bluish, translucent skin, pear-shaped heads with black, inky, almond-shaped eyes. But they were, and again, there's some differences. One of the differences were they were placed on a floating stretcher. They were not supported. No little beings were holding this. It was moving of its own volition. Mm-hmm. They then found themselves presumably inside this object. And Gary found, excuse me, Gary found himself in this circular room, which only had a kind of flat raised table coming up from the ground about 3 or 4 feet. He found, much to his surprise, that he was completely naked. He couldn't move a muscle. He could only move the eyes in his head. And he said, "Malcolm, I would dearly have loved to have lashed out at these wee things, but I couldn't. I couldn't move a muscle." And both men saw a number of things on board that, and I'll quickly just tell you very briefly. When Gary was lying like that, he saw these 2 grey beings at the foot of this bed. One of them had like a pendulum-like device, and it was moving it up and down Gary's body. Then Gary remembers a kind of can shape. If you can imagine just a normal can of soup, but only it being about 3.5 feet tall. Yeah. Same shape, rose up from the floor. Then there was an appendage, a flap, and an appendage came up from that can with something like 2 red LED lights, and it was slowly moving, twisting and turning next to his head. Then above him, this is all different recalls, not on the one occasion. On another recall, I remember seeing a black oinks-shaped device about 3.5 feet tall, twisting and tumbling near the ceiling of this room. And on another occasion, he saw what appeared to be like a pool of a man's shaving gel, liquid shaving gel, bubble up from the floor of this craft. It sounds bizarre, but this is what the witnesses said. Mm-hmm. And coming out of that was a small grey creature. And I says to Gary, because they drew after hypnosis, they just wanted to draw what they saw. Mm-hmm. I says, "Gary, you've drawn what looks like ribs on these creatures. Do you think it was ribs?" No. What do you think it was then?" "I think it was heavy folds of skin, Malcolm, doubling up. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah. One of the other aspects of the case which was dissimilar to European and worldwide events was under the eyes of some of these creatures was a red, yellow and green lines, coloured lines, like fish gills, if you like, but only painted red, yellow and green. Mm-hmm. So that was a difference as well. And Colin had his own experiences as well. So it was a pretty bizarre case. A few years ago, Gary passed a BBC lie detector test. And, and I mean, that's only saying that Gary believes what happened to him was true. You could say maybe what's going on here is UFO abductions a global psychosis, or is it something real, or did he see something natural and his mind made up the rest? But if so, what happened to Colin as well? I could say a lot more in that case. It's such a big case, but that's the kind of nuts and bolts of it.
But there's so many people in the abduction scenario finding that once they get regressed, or even if they don't need to regress, that they're seeing the same things, or like the same things, or the same instruments, and things like that. You know what I mean? So it's for the amount of cases that do pop up, and then for the amount of people that are sharing the same experiences, without seeing some of the stuff in popular culture. You know what I mean? It's tremendous. I mean, it's there.
It certainly is, but we have to be careful because, since those days I've learned about cryptonesia, which means that something that you may have read as a young boy in a kind of book or a newspaper, and maybe we'll say in this case about UFOs or a UFO abduction, is filed away into the very recess of your mind, and it's forgotten about. But under hypnosis, a recall of that nature springs to the surface, and you think it's happening to you. You think it's your experience when in point of fact, it's only something you've read as a small child. So we have to be very, very careful with hypnosis. It's used by proper people. There are not any leading questions. But to me, it's a tool. It's a tool. It's like a workman going into a building site. He doesn't just go on with a hammer. He go on with a bag of tools to get the job done. And hypnosis is a tool to be used, but only very, very careful.
Back into obviously the Falkirk area, and like even kind of it stretches right across. I'm not even going to say Falkirk. I mean, it's like kind of central, right kind of central Scotland. And you've got obviously the A70 case, which like potential abduction, and you've got obviously people are wary of as well, like the Andy Swan case, which is in Armadale. Another could possibly have been an abduction there as well, and you've got the Bob Taylor case, and obviously you've got cases that's happened within the whole kind of Falkirk phenomenon, which could potentially have been abductions as well. No, I wouldn't say all of them, although there's a lot of sightings in there, you know what I mean? But there is cases within that where it looks like it could have probably been something like that along the lines. Did you ever find any military involvement? And I'm not meaning in a case where the usual standard letters that they send out saying that it's from no defence significance. I mean in things like, I'm not going to say the cliche Men in Black, but did you ever see any involvement in that, like government officials or anybody trying to find out things with things between the lines, or doing their own kind of research without it being known? Did you ever find anything like that at all?
No, I mean, I remember one chap said he took me to task for harassing witnesses in the Fife, the Falkland Hill case. And I went, what do you mean? He says, you've been knocking on people's doors asking about UFOs in that area, and it's terrible, Malcolm. You should never have done that. They were quite annoyed at you. I went, when was this? And the gentleman says it was such and such a date. Now, I was working that day in a factory in Alloa for United Glass Limited, and I proved that I was working that day. So somebody was masquerading as Malcolm Robinson on that, to this area, saying they were me, and that really annoyed me. But talking about, Men in Black or people who's maybe tried to interfere with that, I've never really come across that personally. I've heard a few clicks on the phone back in the day, but nothing recently. The only one interesting case I had of so-called Men in Black was when I was revisiting the Dyfed, West Wales UFO sightings of 1977. Myself and my ex-wife went down to Wales in 1980, 3 years later, to reinvestigate them. Very briefly, because again, it's another big story, but very briefly, we went up to, we were staying at the Broadhaven Hotel, which is at St Bride's Bay area of West Wales. And we were there to also interview a lady called Rosa Granville, who's of Spanish orientation. And she had the Havenfort Hotel, which sat atop these big rocks looking out into the sea. And she's had a lot of UFO activity there. There's been a book called The Welsh Triangle by Peter Paget, written about the cases. The Dyfed Enigma by Randall Jones Pugh, another book. Anyway, she told me a story when we interviewed her, and she says, Malcolm, okay, I've got so many stories to tell about UFOs, but I'm going to tell you what happened last week. Okay, what happened? She says, well, there was a knock on the front door, and I went, open the door, and she says, Malcolm, there were these two unusual people, for want of a better word, standing there. I says, how do you mean, people? What was people? Well, I'm not sure. Tell me more. She says they had black trousers, black shoes, black jacket, white shirt, black tie, black trilby hat, two of them, and their faces. Malcolm, their faces looked like a china doll, like wax, and they spoke very gutturally to me. And they said, do you know where Pauline Coombs is? Now, Pauline Coombs had Ripperston Farm, which is it's also had a book written about it. I think it was called The Uninvited by Clive Harold. They had a lot of UFO reports there as well, but that's another story. Mm-hmm. Do you know where Pauline Coombs is? And she says, no, I don't know. I don't know where she is. And at that, they kind of stumbled, kind of stuttered, they kind of wobbled and turned round, not like you and I would turn round normally. Mm-hmm. They kind of, they were moving very erratically. And then she said, for the first time, she noted a strange black car, but it didn't have any wheels. And she says, Malcolm, normally I get a lot of guests to my hotel, and you can hear that the car's crunching up the gravel with the car, tires on the gravel. Mm-hmm. But I never heard that. And she says, but they were so weird looking. So you can ask yourself the question, were these men from the ministry? And if so, why did they look so strange? Or were they something else? Quite bizarre.
Totally, yeah. And going back to the thing where you're saying where somebody was chapping doors and stuff and like as an imposter to yourself, that happened, obviously, it's happened to other researchers, it's happened to like John Keel back in the day as well, referring back to him again, when he had people contacting him saying he'd already tried to contact them and he hadn't. I mean, he knew he was somewhere else, and all these kind of things happened. I mean, totally interesting though. You mentioned earlier on that you're obviously back in Scotland and you're looking to do more Skywatches again and stuff. And when you're on Skywatches, what do you use now in terms of, do you use any technology now, or do you still just use the Mark 1 eyeball when you're out for the Skywatch?
Absolutely, yeah, of course. The best, you're right, the best course of visionary aids is, of course, your good old eyeballs and a good pair of binoculars or a telescope. When we do the Skywatches, we try and point out to anybody who wants to come along, members of the public, look out for satellites. Some of them are just like a small bright point of light will traverse the sky slowly. Some tumble. Then you've got all this space station as well, and you've got all these satellites, etc. So we try and tell them what's in the sky first and foremost, and then of course your aircraft with the navigation lights. You'll see a lot of meteorites, coming into the atmosphere, etc. And then if you're lucky, you may see something unusual, and that's a good thing about it. It's an interaction. It's getting out there with the people and having a good old time, and it's serious, but you can have a good old chat and a good time. I remember we were doing a Skywatch on the moors at Bonnybridge there a few years ago, and it was next to a big farm, and then coming down this farm track was this big black shape, because it was in darkness. All we knew, it was somebody coming out. And it got bigger and bigger and broader. And it was this big lady. It was a farm lady, and she had seen all the cars parked on along the kind of fields. What are you doing here? What's the meaning of this? Get off my land, So sometimes you really got to get permission to kind of park your cars in the moors and stuff like that. But it was quite funny. She said, "Who's in charge of this rabble?" Everybody was fighting to say it was me, so I just put my hand up and took the rap, and he says, "Get out of this, get away from me." So you can have a laugh and a joke, and it's all a bit of fun.
I did at one point, when I was younger, I got my brother-in-law to take me down to one of your lectures in Bonnybridge when I was younger, so I attended one of the lectures in one of the hotels, and then afterwards went to a Skywatch after it as well.
Oh, did you? Oh, that's great. That's great.
Back in the day, I must have been about 16 or 17 or something at the time. Aye, so I could sit and ask you questions all night long, you know what I mean, because you've got a wealth of knowledge and the paranormal, but I think tonight was like try to focus mainly on the Falkirk area and look at the kind of other cases surrounding all that and stuff as well. So So if people are interested in looking at things for SPI, where could they find any information on SPI?
Well, basically, it's just look for me on Facebook, Malcolm Robinson, and check us out there. My books are available on Amazon. That's UFO Case Files of Scotland, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2. We have Paranormal Case Files of Great Britain, Volumes 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. The book that I loved writing is The Monsters of Loch Ness, which is I really enjoyed writing that. And also the Decmont Woods UFO incident, which we haven't touched upon tonight, and also the Socky Poltergeist, which is my latest book. And so yeah, just check them out in Google and and see what you think.
I know obviously due to COVID restrictions, the kind of conferences are working slightly differently. Are you attending any conferences in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm part organiser with Ron Halliday and Alison Dunlop of the Scottish UFO and Paranormal Conference, which has been successfully run for a number of years now in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Falkirk. Sadly, it's not postponed this year. It's going to be done over Zoom, and anybody that attends my lectures know I don't like Zoom. I like just, interacting with the audience and walking about the stage and really getting in there. And just trying to do a lecture on Zoom will be my very, very first time I've used slides on Zoom, so that'll be interesting. My talk on the Socky Poltergeist was postponed in November last year, and it's postponed for June this year due to COVID. It's now rescheduled to November the 20th in Socky Hall, and I'll be speaking and showing slides and also putting out the actual sounds of the Socky Poltergeist that was recorded way back in 1960 by one of the doctors there, Dr. Logan. And so that should be good if it all goes well. In England, I'm speaking at a psychic and spiritual event, 3-day event, Spirit Quest in Bournemouth, in a hotel in Bournemouth. That's in October. And I'm due to attend a lecture for the Outer Limits conference in Hull. I'm the assistant editor of that magazine. So, yeah, I mean, COVID sadly has affected the entertainment industry massively, and it's a great, great shame. And I can only hope that, fingers crossed, if we keep, abiding by the restrictions laid down by the government, and if we all stick to that, things will get better. Here's hoping, anyway.
Yes, freedom is near. It's getting there. Well, Malcolm, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and all your knowledge on the subject, and especially speaking with me tonight. And I'll hopefully speak for you again in the future. And also I'll attend the conference as well, and I'll listen to all the different lectures that will go on during that. And if anybody else wants to see, obviously you can find SPI on Facebook, and all the information would be on there about the conferences. And as Malcolm says, you can find his books and all his information on Amazon as well. So Malcolm, again, I'd like to thank you again, and thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure, Chris. I've really enjoyed it, and I wish you every success in future shows.